Okay, this is a rant. This is my net neutrality rant. You have been warned. Because I am tired of hearing mindless regurgitation of talking points on this subject from people who should know better. Okay, so let's start at the beginning. What's this net neutrality thing all about? Well, pretty much for the whole history of the internet, it's been run under something called the end-to-end principle. End-to-end means from client to server, from your machine to the web server or wherever it is you're connecting to. And in the middle, all of the routers and everything else were not supposed to discriminate. Each bit was supposed to be treated exactly like every other bit. So it didn't matter if it was an email or if it was a streaming video through Netflix or whatever. Didn't matter if it was a BitTorrent file coming down. And so now ISPs have been undermining the end-to-end principle, and we've seen things like that, which some people say are reasonable, like traffic shaping on downloads through BitTorrent, although I personally don't accept that. I think if you pay for 30 megabit per second download speeds, you should be able to download at 30 megabits per second. Maybe that's just me. But they've also started doing some more nefarious things, and I think a lot of this comes from the fact that pretty much all of the ISPs for high-speed internet nowadays are multi-channel providers. They're either cable companies, or even AT&T now has digital channel offerings, which means that they compete with services like Netflix and Hulu Plus. And one thing they've been doing for years that I think is completely bogus is putting on these ridiculous data caps. You know what your data cap should be? 30 megabits per second. Okay, 30 megabits times however many seconds there are in the month. There, that's your data cap. You know, if they don't want you to do that, then don't sell that speed. That should be it. But no, they put these caps on ridiculous levels. They say, well, 90% of the people go below that. I don't believe that for a minute, because with a lot of these data caps, 1 hour of Netflix every day will get you to the cap. No, they're just making it so that you don't get to watch much Netflix or whatever. Because they compete with them. And really with the way things are going between Netflix and Hulu Plus or all these other offerings, the multi-channel providers are really becoming obsolete. Especially with Netflix showing original series such as House of Cards. The world's changing, folks. And they don't like it. Because they're the dinosaurs. Well, lately it's got even more blatant than that. A guy named Matt Vukas has all but definitively verified that Comcast, and Comcast is just like one of the worst of the worst, and it was just like everyone hates Comcast. He pretty much proved that they're throttling Netflix traffic. And he showed that even after buffering Netflix for 5 minutes, he got 235 kilobits per second. That's download speed. You know, that's pretty bad. And the video resolution he got was half that of DVD. So, by way of testing this, he went through a VPN. Now, a VPN is where you connect to a server and you send your requests for things on the internet to that server encrypted. So your ISP doesn't know what you're up to. And then that VPN server routes the packets onto the internet proper and sends the responses back, also encrypted. So basically, when he went through the VPN, Comcast had no way of knowing that he was going to Netflix. Now, a VPN is not ideal because all that extra encryption and routing through the VPN and things like that slows things down. You have to go through that encrypted tunnel, and there might be a number of users hitting that VPN server at one time. But even so, even with the drag of all of that, remember, just regularly he got 235 kilobits. Through the VPN, he got 3 megabits high-definition video. Just by switching to a VPN, same line, same ISP, same computer, same everything. It was just encrypted in a way that Comcast couldn't tell what it was. Now, that's not 100% definitive. I mean, there's all sorts of things that could slow things down. Maybe there was a slow router or a malfunctioning router or something like that, and then the VPN went a different way and didn't run into that. But it doesn't seem very likely. No, it really seems like Comcast is really trying to put the screws on people trying to watch Netflix. So there's all these problems, and I absolutely agree that these are problems, and I absolutely agree, with certain exceptions, which I'll get to a little bit later, but I pretty much agree that all bits should be equal and ISPs shouldn't discriminate. But they say the solution is net neutrality legislation to allow the FCC to regulate internet traffic. The question I have for this is, what are they thinking? Come on, just the very basis of this is a complete absurdity. People fear unfair regulation from their ISP. Okay, so they want the FCC to have that same power to regulate their internet traffic, and they assume it'll suddenly be fair? I mean, what will this do except make the FCC's unfair decisions mandatory for everyone? Let's think about this. Comcast was the number 2 biggest campaign donor in the 2012 election, and AT&T was number 3. And before you go, well, that's those Republicans, those donations tilted heavily in favor of the Democrats. And the Democrats are the ones pushing net neutrality. Folks, government has long been in the back pocket of big cable, telcos, and the National Association of Broadcasters, the very people that net neutrality is supposed to protect us from. And these guys don't just lobby congressmen, they lobby regulators as well. Yes, they send lobbyists to the FCC to get them to do things their way. Do you really think that all of these politicians and bureaucrats have turned over a new leaf and are now acting against their former longtime cronies and finally in favor of consumers? Stop giving the government a free pass. Where's the same skepticism with the FCC that there is with these big cable companies? I mean, just look at what's been going on. Comcast is about to merge with Time Warner. That'll give them over 30% of the market. Comcast has done all sorts of mergers in the past to give them like 20-25% of the market. But they denied the Dish-DirecTV merger so that the satellite operators would have a better chance of mounting good competition against the cable providers because 17% was a monopoly. Oh, 17% is a monopoly and they're going to get 30%. Give me a break, people! Stop pretending they're on your side. They aren't. They are on the side of big broadcasters, big cable companies, and big telcos, and absolutely nothing has happened to change that. They don't care about you. With net neutrality, decisions are going to be made by unelected bureaucrats based on who they listen to. And that's going to be the cable companies and the telcos and the NAB. It's never going to be you, and it's never going to be me. But here's a big problem with net neutrality, as if that wasn't big enough. There's something on the internet called QoS. It's called quality of service. And this is where you actually do prioritize one kind of traffic over another. Now, why would you want to do that? Well, pretty much for the opposite reason that what Comcast is doing. Since streaming video is something that's time sensitive, you got to get those packets down there soon, or else the video's going to stutter and pause or whatever. Not like emails, which, it doesn't really matter, or, you're loading this forum web page that you're typing replies on. That's not as time sensitive. So they can actually shape it so that the QoS actually lets the streaming media packets through more than traffic that isn't as time sensitive. Because, really, you take a 1/10 of a second pause getting video packets down, you'll notice that. Are you going to notice that 1/10 of a second when you get an email or when you're posting to a forum or loading most other web pages or things like that? No. So QoS is there to kind of balance all that out. And it can be really important. Think of telemedicine. More and more, doctors are connecting all over the world through audio and video. You have surgery being performed, or at least supervised, by experts halfway around the world. And they're looking at all the little instruments, and like you got the little camera that goes into the blood vessel or wherever, and they're looking at that, and that goes over the internet. And they need to know where that is at absolutely every moment in time. You have got to get those packets through quickly. ISPs have to be allowed, and internet routers and backbone service providers have to be allowed to prioritize things like telemedicine over things like your kids watching SpongeBob, because it's slightly more important. But what net neutrality is saying is there shouldn't be any QoS, or more specifically, we're going to put the government in charge of QoS. And again, it's just going to be favoritism and cronyism. The same big cable and telco companies in the NAB, they're going to decide what they want to prioritize. And it won't be things that made sense, like what I just talked about. Okay, you think I'm wearing the tinfoil? Do you think I'm being paranoid here? No. What I'm talking about is historical fact. The Interstate Commerce Commission was formed to protect consumers from big railroad. Instead, it ended up protecting big railroad from consumers. It erected barriers to entry so that competition was difficult, if not impossible. If you wanted to set up your own competing railroad company, the Interstate Commerce Commission put a lot of roadblocks in your way. In fact, the rare event seems to be when a regulatory agency doesn't inhibit competition in the industries they regulate. I mean, when does that happen? When has that ever happened? Okay, so whenever someone goes around ranting about something like this, the only question is, okay, well, what's your solution? All right, fair question. In order to get the real solution, you first have to properly diagnose the problem. Why is Comcast able to do what it does? Because for the most part, it has effective monopoly power. It's the only game in town for high-speed internet. In most places where it does have competition, it's a duopoly with something like DSL that's running over older telephone lines that just aren't as fast. You know, you get like 5 or 6 megabits as opposed to 30 or 40. Now, Matt Vukas points this out in his article, but he is completely wrong when he says ISPs are natural monopolies. Anyone who knows anything about economics knows there's no such thing. No, they're monopolies because of the only way you can have monopolies. Government. State and local governments give them franchise deals to provide cable service in a certain area, and every other provider is prohibited by law from competing with them. Now, any politician with the will to do so could stop this in its tracks just by getting rid of these local monopolies. I think I did a pretty good job of showing the proper construction of the Commerce Clause in Part 8 of my Constitution Lecture Series, and net neutrality is blatantly unconstitutional. They only justify it by using a hideously invalid construction of the Commerce Clause. Under a proper construction, they could forbid local monopolies on traffic coming from other states and around the world, which is what the internet is. And even if you don't buy that argument, Article 1, Section 10 of the Constitution expressly forbids the states from interfering with the right to contract. Just take, for example, my case. I have Charter Cable. It's the only one I can choose. AT&T is here, but they just have DSL. They haven't moved UVerse in yet. UVerse is the only thing that could possibly compete with that. But you know what? I'm just 2 miles away from a county line where Time Warner Cable is served. Time Warner's just 2 miles away. I should be allowed to call up Time Warner and say, hey, you want me as a cable customer? And if they say, hells yeah, we'd love to have you as a customer, let's run some cable right up to you, we should be able to do that. We should be able to engage in that contract. We are prohibited by law from doing so. And the cable companies and the telcos love it just fine that way. They're like mob bosses, divvying up their territory. If you take that away and you get competition, Time Warner can come into Lincoln County and compete with Charter, but Charter can also go into Gaston County and compete with Time Warner. And then they have to do things like lower their prices and increase the quality of their service, and not do crap like Comcast is doing and make it so it's harder for people to watch Netflix. You actually have to respond to the needs of the customer. If one ISP does something you don't like, you just choose another. And even if, okay, there's some sort of collusion going on between Time Warner and Charter, which I think pretty much has been solely debunked. I mean, that just doesn't happen again without some sort of government backing, because The profit motive is just too strong for one side to say, screw this, I'm going to get some more customers and break the cartel. But even if that doesn't happen, opening it up to competition means that Joe Bob's internet service can start up. And we're going to have Joe Bob giving internet service to everyone in this area. And maybe Joe Bob does it better. Maybe they'll take their business. Ooh, that's what they don't want. And that's why you don't see any politicians working towards this completely obvious solution. I mean, how many users would Comcast have left if people actually had a choice? Comcast has the worst customer satisfaction rating of any company or government agency in the country, including the IRS. How many people would stay with them if they had a choice? But the politicians just don't do that. Why don't they? Why don't they fix the real issue leading to these problems? Because they don't care about you. Net neutrality is a ruse to get people to allow the government to do what they've wanted to do for decades, regulate the internet. And what we need to do is we need to take all of this time and energy that people are doing running around going, yeah, net neutrality, refocus it instead into getting rid of these local telco and cable monopolies. There's no reason for them. None at all. But no, they distract you from it by, here's the solution, give the FCC power. Yeah, I bet we'll really have to twist the FCC's arm to get them to do this. Folks, they've been trying to do this. They've been trying to do this for decades. Net neutrality is their in. Do you think I'm being paranoid? Look around at what's already happening. The U.S. government is poisoning the DNS entries of websites that they allege infringement against. Often with no court proceedings whatsoever. Usually they'll just go to court and the court will rubber stamp a warrant or something like that, or they might not even go that far. They'll just say, okay, here's my own warrant right here, I just wrote it up. You know, kind of like in Parks and Recreation. I love Ron Swanson's permit. It just says, I can do what I want, Ron. So, yeah, this is the opposite. This is the government saying we can do what we want. They're doing it. They're taking down entire not just entire websites, entire domains. My longtime subscribers will know all about this because we've talked about things like SOPA and PIPA and other things that they've been trying to do this. And there's been all this opposition. Opposition, stop them. Websites going dark out of protest. But what are they doing with net neutrality? Yeah, do net neutrality. It's the same thing, people. There's no difference. When the government is already taking down web domains of websites where no one has been found guilty of any crime, and they just shut the whole freaking domain down, imagine what they could do with this so-called net neutrality power. Government has already done far worse than Comcast has ever done. How can you possibly trust them with this? So that's the lesson of my rant. All this energy that's being poured into supporting net neutrality is misguided and needs to be poured instead into getting rid of cable and telco monopolies. And that's the only way the internet is going to continue to grow and thrive in the 21st century as it has in the late 20th.